with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order, which suspends certain provisions of the open meeting law. We are conducting this meeting online. To ensure public access to the discussions of the Boston Human Rights Commission, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing, and members of the public will have an opportunity to provide comments at the end. So the first order of business is to approve the minutes of July 30th. Are there any additions, corrections, or omissions, corrections, or additions?
I just want to make an announcement that this meeting is being recorded.
Okay. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
All right, the minutes are.
One abstention. I'm
One
gonna abstain. I'm gonna abstain since I wasn't there for the meeting.
Okay, that makes sense. So we got the in the minutes that Bob's going to abstain. Okay, so we're going to move to Evandro, why don't we move to the executive director's report, and then I'll do a report, but basically
Okay.
share the start talking about potential projects, but why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon again to all the commissioners. It's great to see you this afternoon. I'll be brief. I'm hoping that obviously you had a chance to review the potential projects that we sent out, and I'm happy to repeat and summarize some of it later when we get to that discussion. I think this is a great opportunity to discuss those and hopefully decide on some direction of where we should focus. But before we begin with that discussion, I'd like to update briefly on some important internal matters that is happening with us. And I'm hoping that we can discuss this further next meeting. For instance, I'm sure you got the email. The staff has been some trainings that's required by the city of Boston relating to conflicts of interest and procurement process, particularly with the equity issues that we're dealing with in the city now. And they have required that commissioners attend some of the meetings. I know some of you already signed up. If you have any questions, if you need help with signing up, let me know. I also want to mention that we've drafted a couple of documents that hopefully we can have a discussion about at some point, which includes the mission statement, as well as an intake form and an intake policy. A couple of things that we've been up to over the last several weeks. On a weekly basis, you know, I attend the Health and Inequities Task Force. That's one of the potential projects that we'll discuss later. I've also been in touch with the Disability Commission about potentially helping them with a new ordinance that helps people with disability, particularly people that can't hear in the city of Boston, potentially requiring businesses to, when they have TV or other monitors, to put the caption on for people to read. But the most important thing that I want to leave with you before we start with the substantial discussion is about the budget and about staffing. And the reason I decided to bring it up today is because yesterday I had a meeting, we, that is me and Susan, had a meeting with the budget analysts. And obviously, as you know, we are in the second quarter of the fiscal year of FY 2021 now, and we were allocated over $500,000, that majority of which included expenditures for personnel. So essentially, I'm talking about the staffing that we hopefully can do to build capacity. 250 of that 250,000 of that 500, as I indicated in the past, was part of this major initiative by Mayor Walsh to reallocate some of the overtime funding for BPD into other departments to do community-focused work. In fact, they call it a touch and serve. So this money, $250,000, can go for hiring staff that will have direct impact in the community. That is one of the people that I'm suggesting we hire is an education and outreach coordinator, as well as a constituent services coordinator, which will focus on doing intake. So those are two people that I think we should move forward to hire. And initially, the other part of the funding that already was there at $250,000, that money was allocated already for two potential staff positions, one including Director of Enforcement and Investigation, and one additional investigator. That was allocation that was done before we started meeting. Perhaps we can change this in some shape or form. For instance, we can hire a research analyst and or director of policy to help us do the work that we want to do as we start talking about focusing on different projects that will take time and an effort to build. Okay, so I wanted to kind of flag this because I'm required by the budget office to send them a plan of what I intend to spend the 250, particularly that came from BPD with, and I've drafted something I want to send to them and get the ball rolling, and hopefully at some point we can get back to this table and discuss it as a whole. But I kind of just wanted to flag some of these internal operational city requirements that I have to attend to before we get to the bulk of the meeting, which is to discuss, as Madam Chair alluded to, the initiatives that we could potentially focus on for the fiscal year FY 2021. Happy to answer any questions at this point. I kind of just wanted to, obviously I'm going a little fast because I wanted to get to the significant part of the meeting, but I wanted to flag some of these things for you that happen on a daily basis.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Evaldo, is that enough? Is the $500,000 budget enough to staff adequately to do the things that we need to do? And if it's not enough?
That's the question, obviously. Go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
I was going to say, and if it's not, have you put together even a draft budget so that you could do the things you need to do to be successful or effective? Before the commission began meeting, as you know, the budget process of the city starts actually the previous year for the following fiscal year. So by the time the commissioners, all of you were on board, I had already drafted a budget and submitted to them. So I do have that draft budget that I submitted to them. I do think though that $500,000 is a good starting point for us, to say this is some key players that we need to add to the team in order to effectively do the work that we can. And of course, there's room for more if need be going into fiscal year 2022. But if you get into a position where in February we haven't hired anyone, I don't think we're in a position to say, let's get more funding to do this and this and that when we have money invested that we haven't used. So, I appreciate your concern, but I do think that 500, what we have is a good base to start putting together a team for this fiscal year and going beyond. Well, I just want to be clear that.
Yeah, go ahead, Lillian.
I just want to be clear in terms of we're asking for what we need, regardless if we hire that person or not, is that if we say we need $800,000 to be successful, even if we have positions and stuff that we would like to have, and we haven't really put them out, but we haven't really drawn them out fully, but saying that these are the things we need. So if we're saying we have a budget of $800,000 and we were allocated $500,000, of making sure, it's just for me when we talk about budget, I'd rather ask for the rainbow gold package, and if I get the bronze package, but everybody knows clearly that in order for us to be successful, we need the rainbow gold package. And I say that from a standpoint of strategy, but I also say that from a standpoint of being realistic, of dealing with the challenges that we have up front. That if you need the advocacy from the commissioners, with the mayor, because that becomes important. And I don't want to make it an issue, but I just don't want us to set ourselves up from a negative versus from a positive position. That's all.
And
So Evandro, I have a question. So as you know, so we're 1 quarter done of this year.
Yes.
And we haven't spent that money. Can we move it to different line items?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the
Because we
funding,
have a lot of really interesting projects. We might want to hire a consultant for this year.
exactly.
Some upfront work that would carry over possibly to next year.
We're going to get to that in this meeting, I think.
yes, so the funding can be switched from personnel to other spaces. And actually, there's specific funding for consultants too, actually, which I think is about $20,000 that I put in there. But some of the funding from personnel can be switched into activities, if you will, or you know, if you want to order pamphlets, you name it, we can use the money in other ways. But the funding that came from BPD is limited to personnel and activities that directly impact, you know, like for instance, we can't decide to hire an administrator for this position, right? We have to hire someone that's going to touch the public. You understand? So that's the caveat with the funding that came from BPD, the $250,000. But there is funding that we can do for consultants and other matters if we need to.
I think we have a lot of flexibility because this budget was put together before we were on board.
Yes.
And I think after we have this discussion today, I think we have a lot of flexibility in terms of, one, what we
Okay.
want to do with the money, and two, are we going to spend it, and three, if we need more money, Lee, I think we can get it. So Ben?
Yeah, to Leonard's point, though, I think not now, but sometime in between now and the next meeting, it would be great to have the calendar of the FY 2022 budget process so that we can understand when that's coming up and be,
Yeah.
I mean, I realize like we're already into this year and you have to deal with what you got, and it sounds like maybe an additional little gift here from the Boston Police Department, which is great. But I'd like to I'd like to know when that's coming so that we can figure
Yeah.
out our.
I think that would be very useful, Ben.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
See
you-
what
are
the
you-
time
Ben,
frame is.
Are you talking about FY 2022 at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
When
I mean,
we're
I assume 2021 is.
done.
It's
Yeah.
it's done, right?
So when do you
Okay.
have, when do we have to have what to whom? And what
Okay,
is
we'll
it
get
we
that.
have to have?
We'll
What are
get
the,
to,
what are the timelines?
okay, we can get you that information, certainly.
So why don't we talk about some of these projects, and besides what you have in, was sent out ahead of time, I've talked to a number of people too, and so I can't remember what order they're in, but well, the first one is the digital divide, and we talked about this from the beginning, and I don't know whether you saw it, but on Sunday, in the Boston Globe Sunday magazine, there was an article that talked about the digital divide and did do a little piece on Boston about that. Actually, there was a thing on housing too, which I'm going to talk about. But you know, basically, it's interesting that if you live in the Back Bay, where I do, the speed here is over 100. What do they call it? 100 megabytes in terms of speed. And if you live in Roxbury, it's 56. Right? I didn't even know we had dial-up anymore. People have dial-up, but apparently we do. But the divide is not only that there's 5% of the people in Boston don't have access, but it's not only access, it's the speed that you get in terms of broadband. And so if you've got several people in the house who are using it, if you have 3 kids and a parent who are using it, forget it. You have access, but you really don't have access because you don't have enough of broadband to take care of your needs. And as we've talked about before, we've got remote learning. I'm always interested because everybody from the governor, everybody's commissioner, everybody's talking about remote learning as if it was a given everywhere all the time. And in some places in rural Massachusetts, they don't have broadband, literally. So it's very concerning to me that we talk about it as if, okay, we're going to have remote learning, and in some places we really don't have it. But it's not just education, as we've talked about before, it's healthcare in terms of telemedicine. And the mayor talked about, and I think it's very important in terms of access for people in recovery, that they can't go to meetings, but they can do it online. And obviously in terms of business, in supporting business for online commercial reasons. But there clearly is a digital divide. I mean, there's no question there's clearly a digital divide. The issue is we still do not have the exact information in how it is impacting people. We have information from lots of different sources. You know, Mark Resin from at BPS, they're still dropping hotspots at BPS, over 150 of them, to give kids access. They're having libraries have kids use parking lots to give them access to the internet. This is 2020 in Boston.
And it's any time.
Yeah,
Well,
and
this, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, it's all right.
No, this is not new. We've been advocating this for over 15 years. When
Yeah.
we started the program, Computer Take Home project, which started
Yeah.
out of the Claiborne Center and then went to the city,
Yeah,
that's been a number one issue.
yeah,
The thing was, there was an option at that time. The option was you could be there physically. Now,
Yeah.
since that option is not available, I think
No.
it's a tremendous time to really focus in the different advocates that have been doing this from California, from Detroit, Chicago, Boston, for us to link up with them and really, I mean, because it seems like when you talk about remote learning, when you talk about telemedicine, both of those things in the areas of, if it's on a reservation and they're talking about telemedicine in Minnesota where they only have as close as hospital 300 miles away, or if they're talking about within the inner city and everybody's hugging up against the library because they're the only ones that have, 4G. Those things have been around for a while, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity, to your point, to help organize support and to bring that up because of COVID, now these kids who have special needs or just the parents just don't have access to the internet, they're going to be the ones suffering from that. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to put that on the top again. And there's a lot of information, folks talking, especially Austin, and highlighting some of the core areas of what they have. Because we even marched on Verizon, because Verizon was strategically not putting like the BIOS in certain areas of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. So to your point, I think it's very, very, very well needed.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else want to comment on that? Because I think this is the kind of thing we need to have really good data, maybe have a hearing, and really bring this out into the public,
Yeah.
into the light.
Yeah.
And
I was
show that,
almost-
people think the digital divide is gone. Well, it's not. And it's
Nah.
living and well in Boston,
Yeah.
in a place that has wealth, has technology companies up the yin yang. We have technology companies everywhere. There is no justification today for having a digital divide in Boston with a school system that is remote and
I
online.
was on a Zoom call meeting today, and two of the people in the meeting were students. And one of them kept dropping because he didn't have the proper access to,
Right. His broadband wasn't good enough.
yeah,
Right.
broadband wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
I have been teaching online all semester long, and I did last semester. In addition to issues of access to the internet at UMass Boston, plenty of students don't have good internet or internet at all. We find students unable to purchase computers. So there is a program that allows them to borrow some Chromebooks.
Yeah.
So this issue is going all the way up. I have to tell you, for instance, something. My students who live on the Cape, none of them could attend today because no electricity due to the storm.
Storm.
So there are all kinds of issues, but I do see the problem with access to the internet. There's also the issue of several people in an apartment who are taking classes and parents who are working. So that is also an issue that is it's
And I
very
think, Margaret-
complicated to deal with in class.
Lee, yeah.
I think to your point is if we can bring this back on the top again,
Yeah.
I think it gives a tremendous opportunity to talk about disparities and how it looks in and around the internet. And there is data out there. I know that for a fact. It's a matter of us getting it.
Yeah.
But I think that could be a tremendous opportunity for us to put something that's real on the table and be in the forefront of it again.
And I think it could be, if we do this well, and we do, have some data, have a hearing, so it has some human people attached to it, so that people are saying, we're struggling. I have 3 children who are learning remote learning, and we can't make this work. The program we're talking about, I think you might be talking about, is Tech Goes Home, which is a nonprofit in town who's doing a lot of this work, because they not only provide Chromebooks, they have a deal with, I think it's Verizon, that for $120 a year, you can get basic internet, and they do online training people. So there'd be somebody else we can tap. And we need the data, but we need humans attached to it. We need the stories, right? I mean, that's what you do. You gather the data, and then you get the stories, the human stories about how difficult it is to work at home and to provide for your children who are supposedly learning remotely. I know last spring when they said there were 20% of the kids who dropped out. They didn't drop out. They never had access in the first place, right? I mean, I don't know what's happening now, but I think this is something that it's about, don't you think it's about time we brought this out in the light?
Totally.
I think we're the sort of right people, because right now it's all over. Everybody's got their hands in it. BPS is concerned, and actually housing people are trying to put it in housing, right? And they've been trying to do that, and all of which is good, but nobody's got the whole picture. And Carolyn, Chief Crockett, has been trying to gather information, and I've been talking to her. But I think we really need the data. We really need some humans to talk about. We need to have a hearing. And I think our goal, maybe we could think about it, by the end of the calendar year, we have a plan that says, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it needs to be. And here's the timeline. Enough is enough. Let's get this done, rather than talking about it for another 15 years.
I think it is very timely, and I would envision a multi-day hearing where, maybe day 1 of it is the stories and some of the data. And then day 2 is, let's get some people from Verizon and Xfinity and bring them on in and have them react to the data. I think that would be, I think that would make for a very compelling thing. And of all the 6 things that are on our list for today, this is the one thing where I really don't see any other city department that can take ownership of it in the way that we can, because I think that there is a legitimate question here as to whether these companies' practices are discriminatory, if not in intent, then certainly in terms of the outcome, if you line it up to what you're saying about the different neighborhoods. that's worth looking into. That's within our purview. We can do it. And I think we could do it well. And none of these other people are doing it. The closest thing that we have in Massachusetts is the Massachusetts Broadband Institute at the Mass Tech Collaborative, but that's not about us. That's about out west, where you don't have internet service providers for a whole town. And if we raise the profile of this enough, there may be an opportunity for state resources, for stuff beyond the city of Boston to help close this. So I think this is the work that should be pursuing.
I agree. It's much like housing
I would agree.
redlining. Certain neighborhoods have been redlined out of internet access.
And we can set the model for the state.
In the country.
Yes.
No, if you remember, and what, it may have been the first meeting or the second meeting, when I was, talking about this, I actually had my son, I think I sent in a map, remember? And we are redlined. I mean, the fiber goes around Mattapan in Roxbury. Fiber literally goes up to Mattapan's border and then goes around it. So Ben, it would be very interesting to see what Verizon says about how that happened. How did the fiber stop at the Mattapan line? Why was that? And what can be done about it?
Same thing we had with, Amazon. Everyone else could get one-day service. Roxbury couldn't.
Right.
So it's very obvious in my book.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Ben, you're right, is having a day where we learn and a day where Verizon and Comcast, I guess, those are the two big providers. Though I understand there are 37 providers in Boston, but a lot of them are for businesses only. I did a little research myself here in the last day, but there's only 11 residential providers, but there are 37 providers. But there's a deal to be made here, and I really think the time is right and a deal can be made. And I don't think it's 10 years from now or even 5 years from now or even 3 years from now. I think this could be fixed, and I think the time is now. So do we have an agreement? Is anybody reluctant about this, or can we get a consensus of the commissioners to say we should move forward with this? Anne?
I think we should definitely move forward. And I also want to have us keep in mind, maybe those providers that just provide to businesses, because there are a lot of businesses that are going to be hurting, especially businesses, the small businesses, and especially businesses, minority-owned businesses. And they should be held accountable too if they're not providing access in certain neighborhoods.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point, because those businesses happen to be in Mattapan, Roxbury, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't think we need a motion, but I'd just like a sense of the group. Or do we have agreement of the 7 commissioners that we go ahead? Do I see a?
I'm for it, yes.
Yes.
We lost Leonard.
We lost Leonard. Yeah, I was just going to say, but he seemed to be.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, he's
wait.
back.
Yeah, he seemed to be very much, he was the one that said we've been talking about this for.
Wait, he's coming back, it looks like.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay. All right. So good. I feel good about that. I think we need to get something under our belt here. And this, I think, Ben, as you said, this seems like really an appropriate thing for us to do, is to get the data and then ask the questions and bring some light onto it and see what the plan is. One of the other things that I spent some time on, and I don't know who else is looking at this, though I didn't have a time, and maybe Evandro, you could talk to Will about this in Fair Housing. I know that the fair housing folks are following up on the Suffolk study that showed all the discrimination in the city, though it's an interesting piece, as Suffolk said they were using it for educational purposes. So now fair housing is going back paying Suffolk to redo it for their purposes. But there was a in the Boston Magazine, there was a piece on what's going to happen in the United States when the rent moratorium ends in terms of housing. And Boston was cited. And in the first 3 months of COVID, 98% of the evictions in Boston were Black and brown.
Is that different than what it was before?
Yeah, I know. That's a very good question. I actually thought of that question, but I didn't know how to get the answer to it. Leslie, not sure. Maybe the same, not sure.
Well, right now with the gentrification that's going on in Roxbury and Dorchester and up into Mattapan, people are buying the houses and getting rid of the folks.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, which is, I know Ann and I know Ann, you're well aware of that, but the issue here is I think twofold. It's one is the rent moratorium, and the other is the mortgage moratorium. You know, the landlords also have the problem. Some of these small landlords who have a mortgage moratorium, they're having the same kind of problem, and you know. And if we now are the state with second highest unemployment rate as opposed to the first. We fell out of the first, now we're second. But I'm just wondering about if there's any plan, and maybe Evandro and Susan, maybe you could check around the city and see if there is anybody looking at this, because this is going to have a disparate impact on Black and brown people. There's no question here. When this housing rent moratorium is over. And I can just see that. I don't know what's going to happen to people as they are evicted. Where are they going? And they don't have jobs. And what's going to happen to the landlords in terms of foreclosures? I don't know. I mean, I suppose it will make a difference in terms of what happens on the federal level in terms of relief and what's done with the Congress and what happens with the election. But it is something that I would hope that the state and the city are looking at. I assume someone's looking at it. Anybody here know anything about that? Ann, you would be a good person to know.
So
Yeah.
I know at the City of Boston, the housing stability is looking at that. I also know that on the state level, the state put in an extra 15 million into the RAF program, which helps pay past due rent for families to stabilize them so they do not get evicted. And they also started a new program that will pay mortgages for people so that they won't lose their housing. But there is not enough money to cover everyone if this really happens. And the federal moratorium is probably going to lose in court and will be overturned. But at the state level, Charlie Baker has shown he is going to let it run out.
He said that.
Yes. So I don't know how many evictions the court can handle at once. So we might not see, just because the court can't handle them, we might not see tons of people being evicted all at the same time, but there will be many people that will be evicted, and there's not enough money in the state coffers to cover people's rent. And I agree, the mortgage is also a problem because we have 10,000 vouchers, and they're all, most of our landlords are mom and pop landlords. They own a triple decker. And they have one unit Section 8, one unit is market rate. there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be hurting. And if we lose those mom and pop landlords, if their properties foreclosed, that's less housing that's available in the city of Boston for people.
So this is a huge problem, maybe bigger than us. But what I did do is I called the woman who wrote the piece for the Boston Globe. She sent me to the person who did all the data, and he's going to send me the Boston data. So I will share that. He works for a firm, but he's the pro bono person for this finance firm. And then I think maybe we should share it with somebody in the city. I don't know who's, it's really more of a state issue, right, Ann, than a city issue?
Yes, and CHAPA is working very hard on this issue. CHAPA is, has a lot of members, including us, and up and down the CDCs, and everybody is well aware and trying to work on this. And frankly, we're afraid that they're not going to have the money at the state level unless the feds pass a stimulus package that has money in there for it. They did give us some money, but not a lot.
So I will give you the information and the person who's doing this, because he's going to send me the Massachusetts information and the Boston information. And this is data that they're projecting the impact it will have in the state and the city, and the disparate impact on Black and brown people. So when I get that, I will give it to you.
Great.
And then you will fix it.
Madam Chair, I believe I added I think that's the article that you were talking about. I put it in the chat if folks want to take a look at it. I began to do some light digging myself. I think the woman that wrote it was Emily, I believe.
Yeah, I talked to her, but she didn't do the analysis. The analysis was done by Neil, and he's at a firm called Stout, but he's the pro bono guy. So he just said he'll do this for us and send it to us. And I said, fine. So he's going to send us all the information, and then I think Evandra, we'll give it to Ann, and then Evandra, we can check around in the city and see if anybody else is looking at this. I think this is a big problem, probably a state problem, one that we can't solve, but somebody should pay attention to it.
Yes, in fact, there's a bill at the State House dealing with this as well.
Yeah,
and the article mentions that briefly.
Yeah.
But I guess to some extent, I guess when we get the data, we'll figure out what the angle could be. But when I read it, it did look to me that it was state and Congress and federal issues right now. I wasn't clear in terms of where we could play a role, but maybe the data can help guide us some.
Right. Well, we'll share
the
that.
Office of Housing Stability subcontracts with us to have 2 case managers that are in housing court. So once evictions start, we will have people on site in housing court that will be able to help people and hopefully delay their evictions.
Okay. And
I can get in touch with them as well.
This is one of the states that you are not entitled to a lawyer in housing court being evicted. There are states that you are entitled to a lawyer. This is not one of them.
Is that something that we can advocate for?
Yeah, I think I'm not 100% sure.
Here,
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut
I'm just saying, I think, as we lay things out for ourselves, and we should talk about them as we go along. I brought it up, so.
I think this might be part of this Guaranteed Housing Stability Act of the state, which for next time I can take a further look, but I know that there's been bills and advocacy towards even some within the city of Boston towards, having right of free counsel during those processes.
Yeah, I think it's come up before.
It has.
I want to turn our attention to 2, and I know, Evandra, you've been sitting down on one. Sitting in one is the health task force. There are two task forces that have been set up, the COVID health task force, whose recommendations are supposed to be coming out I know Chief Crockett thought they were out, but do you know if they are out?
I've tried to, unfortunately, I haven't been able to confirm, but my sense, again, particularly because I've attended some of these meetings, is that they are in the drafting mode right now. It's not released. And in fact, they have the meetings have been led, if you will, by a consultant, talking about consultants
Right.
that they hired to help them frame their conversation. But this one thing that I did realize in that conversation is, one, that obviously they are primarily, all of them are volunteer leaders of the community of the city of Boston, and they're looking to figure out how they can stay engaged with the city long term, particularly how to enforce some of their recommendations. And I thought that perhaps we can step in some shape or form, particularly because we have subpoena powers, and we can have ongoing hearing of some of these issues. So that's why I brought it up in here to some extent. Because
Well, there are two major task force that are ending their work. One is the COVID task force, health task force, and it really is on disparities, right?
Right.
Access to healthcare. The other one is police, the police reform task force. And I think it came out with a 17-page report. They've gone through hearings. They have finished the hearings. They are redrafting, finishing the final draft of that report. And I guess my concern about both of these reports is they're vitally important. One is about accessing healthcare in poor communities, underserved communities. The other is about police reform. And my concern is what happens to the reports. We know what's happened to police reform reports before. And they do have a lot of dust on them, as do most task force reports. And there were good people involved in this, and they usually are good people, and they usually are well-intended. Both the people who asked and the people who do the report and the people who get the report. And I think one of the things I would like to hear from you is, when these task forces turn in their final reports, I mean, I think we should take a look at both of them, my suggestion is, and see if both or either of them are ones that we should take some responsibility for, because who else is? I don't know.
I agree with you. These are the issues that we need to be concerned about.
Absolutely agree with you. I think it's
Yeah.
extremely important.
Very.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm glad that we are in this position right now, that we might be able to look at this and give our opinion.
Anybody else want to comment on either of these, the health task force or the police standards?
I
Ben?
think the health task force will invariably be something that is kind of in our arena, because it is about disparate impacts of COVID. The police one, I wonder how much of it is going to be about use of force and body cameras and things that are less about how the police are deployed to particular neighborhoods, and more about the mechanics of policing, in which case I don't know that that's really in our wheelhouse. But I think I think that we need to read it and find out.
I disagree completely. I think that when we talk about human rights, the rights to be able to not fear the police should be a basic human right. To not fear that you're going to be a victim of the police simply because of the color of your skin should be a basic human right. And if we don't, I don't know what other group would look at that. No, I think that that is something, as much as the COVID, I think it's equally our responsibility. Now, we
I
might,
agree with the
might not
judge.
have any powers to change anything, but I think we should have an opinion about it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Judge. You know, the health piece, I'm with the Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition, and we've been looking at that we've been looking at the whole testing and the sampling thing about a cure and how it's being handled in the Black community. Fear that the Black community has and what people are doing and taking for granted. So I think that's excellent for the health piece, but also the police piece is huge. I mean, it's a lot. And clearly understand we're going to have to pick and choose exactly where we're going to go, because just the police alone, if we're going to be effective at any level, it's going to consume a lot of time, if not.
Yeah, you're sort of fading in and out, Lee, but we get your drift here.
Sorry, did you
No,
hear what
that's
I said?
okay. No, we
Yeah,
get,
full coverage where you
All right.
are.
yeah, it's okay. Bob,
So-
what about you? You have an Ann?
All right.
You know, we're still waiting for the Massachusetts Senate and House, you know, to.
Bill.
Yeah, they need, there's no far reachings. Everybody's doing things incremental. No
Right.
one is really
Yep.
making big steps. And I think that I don't know what our role would be, but you're right. There's, you know, body cameras and more training. And I know that the current task force is calling for an independent office of police accountability and transparency, but there has to be a role for us to make sure that it's just not, you know, they're not just, you know, window dressing things, that there are going to be real change.
Exactly.
And that apparently has been the case with the current body that is reviewing
Oh,
complaints.
yeah,
So I think that the space is open for us and for anybody else who wants to take the position there.
If I may add briefly, there is the report, as Chairwoman mentioned, is 17 pages, and we only grabbed just the summaries to provide to you. So we should dive more into it. But there's, for instance, there's portions of it that talk about, you know, change within the FIO system, which is essentially when the police stop people in the street and FIO, just get the information and keep it in the system. There's been data suggesting that, you know, that's desperately impacting African-American men, particularly the neighborhoods of the city of Boston. So there is an angle, I think there is opportunity there, but it's not clear to me as well how, in a sense, unless we could play an sort of like a roll up here to kind of look at all the different recommendations that they ultimately make, and sort of help push that these recommendations can change, you know, can actually happen, as Margaret alluded to earlier. Sometimes they don't. So that's one role, but there's also specific spaces that we can go, I think, but it's not crystal clear, as obviously we're debating now.
So
But if we look at the police, one of the things that's going to be real clear is just the systemic racism that has been going on within the police department within Boston, and the complaints and the different things that have a direct impact on the community at hand in terms of, you know, dispatching police officers, which group of people are going. I mean, there's so much when you're talking about the police that one has a direct impact on the other. And it's something that we're going to look at. It's going to open up a lot of different things, socially and politically.
yes, we'll become very popular with the police and everybody else. We would become very
Well,
complicated.
yeah.
And I've been in this position before because that was, when I was a young lawyer, that was my main thing, was suing police departments. So I know what it's like to be popular in a city where you're suing the police departments. So watch while you're driving, Lee, there. Since we're being, you know, we're sort of videoing this everywhere, so we won't say where you are on the road, so it's okay. Here's what I will say. I do think that, I don't know what role, but I think all of us feel, at least I feel, I should speak for myself, that people put in a lot of work, a lot of good people, and they will go away, this task force on the police. They will go away. And I do think that we should take some responsibility to keep this on the front burner in terms of what recommendations they made. They may not all be in our bailiwick, but this task force came about because of race. That's where it came from. It didn't just spring up because, gee, I think let's look at the police. It came up because Black men were being shot or killed, and because of systematic racism. And that's where it came from. It came from the times that we are in. And so it seems to me, and half of the citizen review boards in the country for police are run out of the human rights commissions, half. See, I worked for my money here at the commission. And I think I ought to double my pay anyway. I was surprised to hear that, but it is true. Now, some human rights commissions have a number of things under them, but half of them have this as part of their role. Some directly, and some it's a sub part of what they do. And actually the commission, I don't know whether you've seen it, but it's pretty complicated. There's sort of 3 bodies they're suggesting.
Right.
It's pretty complicated. So my suggestion is that when it's finished, we review it and look at it. And I think our commitment ought to be that it not get lost. What role we should play in it, I don't know, because it's not done yet.
Right, we might agree with them.
And maybe meet with them. Or maybe at least meet with the leadership. I don't know, but when it's done, I think that's a great idea, actually. Yeah, yeah.
So then we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously, as soon as that comes out, we'll circulate it amongst all of you and try to put a plan together to get in front of it. I mean, obviously, the idea is that they would submit the final report to the mayor, and the mayor will then make changes, right? And
I don't think
implement.
he's going to make changes in the report. No.
Right. I'm sorry.
I think they make recommendations to him, and then he's going to figure out what to do.
Right.
He's
right.
going to have to parcel it out, and I don't know exactly what he's going to do. I'm not sure he knows what he's going to do yet, because. And I've talked to Carolyn about this, Crockett, a little bit, and when it's done. Both of these task forces I'll talk to her about, and we ought to all talk to her about it again, but I think both of them, we ought to keep our eye out. There's been a lot of work done, and I think we ought to play our role being, a place where they sit so they don't get lost, and see what role we ought to play. That's my suggestion. And maybe it's a little role, maybe it's a big role, maybe it's just that we dust them off so they don't get lost, but at least they won't get lost. At least we'll have them, and we know that we'll have responsibilities so they're not forgotten. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Trying to figure what else was on our list here.
The only one, well, it looks like to be the immigrant community focused issue and the transgender community. Those are the 2 left. And obviously this wasn't meant to be exhaustive, so If there's anything else, this would be an opportunity to discuss as well. But which one would you prefer to discuss next?
I think the immigrant community kind of intersects with some of the issues we've already dealt with. Certainly, the internet, access to the internet, certainly health disparities, and Boston Police Department. So I will be moving my little flag every time we discuss these issues, but I think that there is a lot of intersections. And of course, the idea of the outreach, it's excellent. I do have a little concern. I want to put it out here. I have a concern about voting rights and fear. It's very easy to intimidate new Americans. Very, very easy to intimidate them to not to vote. So I have gone ahead and volunteered to be one of the voting monitors in the city of Boston in this election. And I don't know if there is anything that we should do or can do, but I think there is a need for a message to be sent around the city of Boston. There's something the city of Boston could do, and it's actually in today's paper. We need more mailboxes.
Yeah.
For early voting.
Yeah.
There was only one apparently in the preliminary elections. We need more, and we need them in the communities where people are working and can't be going anywhere. We need them where the elderly live. So if we could push the mayor or whomever in the city of Boston to start planning for that, that would be great. Certainly the right to vote and to be represented is a basic human right.
In underserved communities, particularly immigrant communities, to have more of the boxes for votes to be deposited.
I don't know if we would also ever use ourselves as a bully pulpit, like the Safe Communities Act that is also up at the State House, which would, focuses on police and the courts and immigrant enforcement. I don't know if we could ever just make statements about legislation that's up there that would have a real impact on people's lives.
I think we can make a statement if we all agree to make a statement. Now, are you talking about which one are you talking about? What legislation are you talking about?
The Safe Communities Act.
The driver's license.
So, yes, and it also. Let me try and see if I can find the actual bill.
Perhaps I can help because I worked on it before. Essentially, the Safe Communities Act, without all the details, it's what we call in the city the Trust Act that the city has as an ordinance. Essentially, it limits or prohibits the use of local and state. Obviously, when we talk about on Beacon Hill, state agencies and state law enforcement agencies from participating and collaborating and sharing information with ICE. So that's pretty much the same space of police, local law enforcement enforcing ICE sort of holds. This came out obviously over the years where ICE would just give a heads up to a local law enforcement official and say, so-and-so, we're looking for them, hold them, and the person wouldn't be able to bail themselves out even though it was a minor crime that they committed that they should have walked out.
That is in existence in Boston, though. That Trust Act is enforced in Boston.
Right. So so the city itself, through the offices, through the mayor as well as city council, they passed this bill in the city that prohibits BPD in particular from sharing information, BPD and some school police and such. So at least in terms of what I wrote here was that essentially we could do more of an advocacy piece and education piece to the community about what the Trust Act locally is, right? And in the hopes that we engage essentially the communities that they're trying to target. But to a certain extent, they passed this bill, if you will, right? It's the law of the land. And we know, for instance, we had some issues with it, unfortunately, within BPD, and particularly with some information being shared that shouldn't be shared. But more so than that is how do the immigrant communities know what their rights are under this? So that's where the angle for that particularly is. But the Trust Act, to answer your question, the Safe Communities Act at the state level is the Trust Act in the city ordinance.
Yeah. So my sort of sense is, our role is the Boston Human Rights Commission, and I would think our first sort of responsibility would be to make sure that immigrants in our city understand their rights under the Trust Act, and that the Trust Act is enforced in our city. For instance, and I think it is true now under Brenda Concilius, the superintendent, it is absolutely clear that the police in Boston schools are not to share information about immigrants with ICE. She's made that clear since she arrived. So, issues like that, and if there are other issues like that, there are other things that we should be doing in terms of education and information. But I think you're absolutely true in terms of fear, whether people are documented or undocumented. There is a fear on the part of immigrants because we know people have been swept up who have green cards or are citizens have been swept up in some of these raids or sweeps, and then it's hard to get unswept.
Yes.
So
families are split. There is another group of people, immigrants, who are might be getting closer to not very good point. There are TPS, transitional. There are people who have transitional protection, usually for countries that were war torn, etc. And the current person in the White House is trying to stop that program.
right,
That program includes a lot of children, a lot.
right. Refugees really out of or from hurricanes or war-torn countries. Yeah. So let me ask you, and I would say with Giuseppe, are there things that we could do with him that would provide more? I know he does a weekly sort of information education online program. I think we should ask him if there are things that we can do to support him, or other things that we can do that he's not doing that would bring information and education to the immigrants in our city that he thinks would be helpful. I know we've asked him this before originally, but to be specific, are there things that we could do, and where and how?
So I'm glad you brought that up, Madam Chair. In fact, I had a conversation with, by him, I assume you're talking about Yusufi Valley.
Yeah.
The executive director of the Immigrant Advancement Team.
Yeah.
He, as you mentioned, he has a weekly webinar. Something that we could do, for instance, as you said, was maybe come in there 20 minutes to talk to those nonprofit organizations about what this looks like, and hear from them. For instance, this looks like that is, as in, what is the Trust Act says? What is it that the BPS is putting out now? So the message is clear to them, and get from them what else we can do to get the message to other people in the immigrant communities, right? And to go back, for instance, to something that I think was Ian that mentioned earlier, was some of the funding could be shifted towards this. If we want to do a campaign, whether it's to use, for instance, local ethnic media, as sometimes are known, or go on the radio, or put some pamphlets together about this, you name it, that costs funding, we can allocate funding to do those sort of things as well.
So, but my question is, what is it we can do that's different than what he's doing? I mean, that's one of his jobs is disseminate information, inform and educate the immigrant community. So I'm trying to figure out, I mean, and he knows the Trust Act in and out. And so I'm trying to figure out what we bring to the table.
But I believe that this educating the public on this space is not one that they're taking right now. They are doing, particularly in light of COVID, a lot of the stuff that they're discussing on the webinar at the thick of it was about, you know, the rental relief, the other benefits that they can access. But the specific focus on Trust Act is not one that he's doing right now. This is based on conversation that we had.
Okay, so maybe that's something we can revisit.
Okay.
So the only other thing we had on our agenda was what? Andrew, I just.
It's the essentially,
LGBTQ and transgender community.
right. One of the things that is, I'm sure all of you are aware of, is the reason why, one of the key reasons why this commission was created back in the 80s was because gay community at that point, mainly gay and lesbians, did not have, you know, obviously nowadays we have the laws that are much better than before. They didn't have a place to go to back then, okay? They didn't exist, you know, people couldn't get married, there were attacks against gay and lesbians, particularly in the 80s, dealing with the AIDS epidemic. They were blamed and all of these things. So they were being attacked on a daily basis. It sounded to me that based on, you know, some conversations, I believe that it was actually Ann Russo that brought this up in the commission meeting early on. And then we attended a city council hearing on this. It sounds to me that the transgender community right now in the city of Boston, in the city of Boston, throughout the country, really, there's a rise of violence against them. And two, there's not a place for them to go. Just like the gay and lesbians did not have a place for them to go to get the grievances out, to be heard, to help protect them. It sounds to me right now that they're in the city of Boston, particularly within the city of Boston and in the state, that there's not a place for them to be, you know, to be included, to be protected from violence. So, you know, I thought that this is a space that, because it's wide open, we can find something potentially to do here to help, you know, one of the communities that obviously is a protected class under our ordinance, which, you know, protects people's gender identity, as you know. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense in my opinion, and I think in addition to do things that have to do with you know, communicating with that community so that they know they can file discrimination claims with us directly. There might be something that we can do regarding bathrooms, public restrooms in the city. I know the mayor has been very proactive in this in this sense, and but maybe that community could bring the issue up, or we could have a hearing and sort of hear what it is that it would be the most important things. In Boston Public Schools also could be doing a little more. I don't know that they have the tools right now to do it.
Actually, this is one of the things that the state has done well, that DESE has done well, and started earlier than almost anybody else, I have to say. It's, you know, when I was on the DESE board, I have to say I admired that they were out there this early. And I remember sitting on, when I was on the board, they had a hearing on transgender youth and what the rules were around it and expectations. And I think it was really one of the first in the country to require training in all the school systems. I don't know where it is now. But what I would say, Evandro, is why don't you touch base with leaders in this community?
Okay,
See, where this is in terms of need, and see if this is something we need to bring forward and put on our list, and where on the list, and bring it back. Okay.
okay.
We're getting to the hour where we need public comment. Let me just summarize if I can, and see if we all agree.
Could,
Yeah.
Madam Chairwoman, can I just make, I brought this up before,
Yep.
but I think this is something that we should do a hearing on, and that's just the marginalization and the destruction of Black males, especially here in Boston. And I'm
Yep.
talking from school age all the way up to adult. All these things that are happening in this country, the majority of it has been focused on the destruction of Black males, homicides, murders, and a lot of it's based solely on racism and human rights. And I think we would be remiss if we did not try to put something together to really focus on that, because there's so much data and history since the beginning of slavery that the focus has been on the destruction of Black males in America. And I think it could be an opportunity for us, because no one else is talking about it. Don't ask me why, but no one else is talking about it. They're talking about everything else but that, and also trying to develop healing for Black males in Boston and in America. I think we would be remiss if we did not try to focus at some level on how the destruction of Black males has been. And it's been very focused, very, very focused. And just through the healing process and developing healing processes with a number of different groups that are in and around Boston and within the state. But I think, being a Human Rights Commission, I think we would be remiss if we did not try to put something together focused solely on Black males.
Is there someone else in some other group or groups in the city who are working on this, paying attention to this, that we could work with?
There are several groups, but it's always connected to something like substance abuse, a fatherhood group, stuff like that. But there's there's not a sole group that talks about the healing from the trauma and the stress of being a Black male and seeing your image marginalized on a daily basis.
Because, I don't think we bring the expertise. We would certainly need, I think it's an interesting idea in terms of, could we have a hearing and what would you see us doing, Lee, rather than me guessing?
Well, I could see us bringing it to the forefront and having a discussion and bringing it to light to let people know and see what's been going on. I mean, there's tons of data out there.
Yeah.
The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation did a piece. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. It's just a matter of gathering that stuff and then being able to present it. Especially, there's a lot of stuff from like The Destruction of Black Boys by Kanjufu, who wrote a series of different books on Black males and the destruction of Black males. I mean, there's stuff out there. It's just a matter of us being able to bring it up and into the light again, so we can start having conversations and looking at that data and seeing how real it is, not to negate what's happening with Black females or Black children, but there's been a focused effort. That what scares me is that no one is talking about it.
Right.
And everybody knows it, but they're talking about everything else but that.
So here's my concern, is I totally agree with you. Black men are disappearing from college, by the way. They're disappearing.
Oh no, there's never been there. Black females have been there 10 times more than Black males.
Yeah, but I mean,
but even more so,
the numbers are going down, though. I mean,
yeah.
they're going down. And and Black women have always been in much higher numbers in college, but Black men are literally disappearing from college.
Especially American-born Black men.
Yeah,
Exactly.
American-born Black men, yes, disappearing from college. It's a real concern. And concern in high school, finishing high school. So what I'm trying to figure out, Lee, is we bring this forward so it comes to light. But after it comes to light, what's the goal? After, you know, we may, okay, so this is bad. We need to do something. Somebody needs to do something about it. I mean, I'm trying to figure out.
Well, we
Part of
can,
it-
we can start from a public health standpoint and mental health
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah,
We can start to demand that there's specific programs around healing. And when I talk about healing, I'm talking about the trauma that Black males have to deal with on a daily basis in terms of seeing their image being either murdered or marginalized. I mean, everyone has stories. Every Black male has a story of direct and focused racism and marginalization. And I'm talking about that happens before they start to self-medicate through drugs and violence and all the other stuff. This starts at a very, very early age, and we can bring it back to light. Because it was at light at one point, and they talked about the data that, in terms of young Black males being thrown into special ed every time they moved, and that starts a history or a pattern that follows them all the way until adulthood. I mean, as you may be aware of, I know the judges is that, you know, private prisons, they look at the failure of third graders to build more prisons.
oh yeah,
I mean, so there's a lot of stuff out there, and I think we have an opportunity to do something that should be done, and it's not.
sort of sounds like Truth and Reconciliation around Black men. I mean, you know, sort of bringing forward so people understand. You know, you know, I'm open, obviously, and I just want something to become of it. I would like to see something become of it in terms of making it better, not just knowing more about it, you know?
Oh no, I agree. I mean, I guess we're starting a movement, just like they did for domestic violence and rape crisis centers. I would love to have a male center that really talks about how to deal with the trauma, what's going on, and also alerting people of how they have an impact on Black men in America or Black men in Massachusetts. I think it's an opportunity at the early days of as overseeing rape crisis centers for the state. In the early days of that movement, there was a movement, and people brought it to light. And then they were able to start to identify how can we help and support women who have been abused, and what's the different support systems that we can put in place. So when we talk about what can we do, it can start to be the beginning of healing, of developing mechanisms to help Black men in America heal from the atrocities that have happened from slavery, Jim Crow, modern day America.
Yeah, walking while Black. Never mind driving while Black, just walking.
The trauma, the ongoing trauma
Yeah,
of every day wondering if your child is going to make it back home,
I know.
That's
if
right.
you're going to make it back home.
Yeah,
Right.
It's a real
you know,
thing.
yeah.
So,
I wonder, and please forgive me because I am a foreign-born person, although I'm very American.
yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't there a way that we can, in our efforts, clarify for people, convey better that whether intentionally or not completely intentionally, there has been in the history of our country a genocidal movement against African Americans.
Oh yeah.
That is part of the truth
Yeah,
That's the truth.
that we want to ignore as a country.
yeah.
That's right.
But the word genocidal, it's a very charged
Provocative word.
word.
Charge.
But I have not heard it used in the regular conversation in our communities. People are, I think perhaps because I come from an outsider point of view, I see it but I feel like people around me don't dare to say it. It is not going to be easy to prove a genocidal intent across 400, 500 years. But certainly,
I believe the history itself proves it.
right.
You know,
Yes, indeed.
But that intentional or semi-intentional set of policies have created an enormous problem of mental health.
yes.
Mental health in the communities
Totally. Totally.
that need to be addressed.
Well, one of the things that is absolutely true is that all of us who grew up here never learned of the kind of actions and attitudes that have existed for hundreds of years. We didn't learn about it, we didn't know about it. It was ignored in history, never talked about. And it's interesting, I think a lot of people over the last year or two have gone back and read things and been shocked by them. People who thought they knew and understood racism and have gone back now and read things again and just said, how did I not know that? How did I not know about Tulsa? Right? People who went around the June, when the president went to Tulsa, people said, I never knew that. I never knew that. How could I not know that?
Well, the president has said very clearly that he does not want us to reteach history.
I know, and now that's coming.
Right. That's right.
So we could spend a lot of time talking among ourselves about this issue. I would suggest, Evandro, why don't you talk to Lee about this? See who we can talk to, what this would look like, and I mean, it's clearly a huge issue for men. There's no question about it. And if we can play a role, I would be happy to be the commission who hosts that, or maybe host it with some other body, that makes sense as well. But I agree totally. It's a huge issue, and one that is not getting better in terms of opportunity and performance expectations of Black youth, males, in our communities. It's really frightening.
Okay.
And Madam Chairperson, the thing is, the community knows this.
Yeah,
The world doesn't.
I know.
The community knows everything that goes on.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're Black in America, everybody knows.
Yeah.
I can go Chicago, I can go to Wichita, if you're Black, you know this. You
Yeah.
know what's going on to Black males.
Yeah.
The thing is how can we let the whole world know and that it's wrong? And how can we help change that? Because we'll find a lot of allies. We will find a lot of allies who are going to be willing to work with us to help change the narrative.
And how can we as a commission educate people in Boston in terms of what's happening in Boston with Black boys and young men and men? If we put it that way, I think it seems a little more doable, that maybe people need to understand that this is not just some issue out there. This is an issue for us.
Oh, no, totally. And one of the things
we need to pay attention to, because this is our issue, and it's not something out there, it's our issue. And this actually fits into some of the other things we're talking about, like access to healthcare and police reform.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one mechanism for doing this, and this sort of goes full circle back to what Evandro was saying about budgets and hiring plans, is if you create a full-time position that is essentially an event planner, and you have the Boston Human Rights Commission every year host a full day or multi-day symposium on a particular issue to raise awareness of that issue. You bring in speakers, you have people tell their stories. You know, this could be year one of that.
Right.
And we could establish that, if the city's willing to commit the resources, we could establish that as a recurring thing. You know, that would be, you know, that could be a really good use of our, someone I think said bully pulpit earlier, but just like our name.
Yep.
Yeah, human rights.
Yep.
It definitely, you know, when the mayor, I think, has only hosted 2 conversations about racism in the city,
Yep.
and they were very powerful events. I went to both of them.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, we have to keep the conversation going. And you're right, if we focus on one aspect, it could make a big difference.
And we could, you know, the Human Rights Commission sponsors this with the mayor. I mean, you know, whatever we could do this as the focal point being Black boys, Black young men and men. I think that would be an important statement. Yeah, I think we're getting there. See, talking to
Yes.
each other works.
We're teasing it out.
Once in a while. You know. All right, so let's see if we can summarize here. We're going to definitely take up the issue around the digital divide and do maybe a 2-day hearing, one which will be data and stories of people who are being impacted by lack of resources, and maybe one where we'll bring in some of the providers to explain why this situation exists. We're going to get the 2 reports from the COVID Health Task Force and the Police Task Force when they're available, and see what makes sense. And our responsibility will be, we will hold those, and our job will be responsible that they don't get lost, that they stay relevant to our city, and we will take up pieces of them that make sense to our mandate. And maybe if it makes sense as a group, or some of us meet with some members of or leadership of the police task force, if after we read it, if it makes sense. We will look at the possibility of doing a, whatever we call it, a seminar conversation, I like, actually, I don't know, on Black boys and men, Black males, as a day with the Boston Human Rights Commission, maybe with another group, maybe with the mayor, to highlight what is happening in our city with young Black men, and what is not happening. And we will start trying to talk to people and figure out what that looks like. And Evandra, you're going to check with particularly the transgender community to see
Yes.
if there's some role for us with that. We're going to check with the immigrant office to see what role we can play in terms of education and about the Trust Act with the immigrant community that their office is not playing now.
Okay.
And after we do all of that, we can retire.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited. I think it's been a very good meeting for sure. Is there anybody want to comment before we go to public comments?
Can we get those mailboxes, those boxes for the votes?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's make sure that that the Human Rights, Boston Human Rights Commission recommends to whom?
Mayor, the mayor.
Is it the mayor, though?
In Mayor Election Department?
Yeah.
Board of Elections, yeah.
Election Department, right, to the mayor. I would say to the mayor and the Election Department. It's
Mhm.
the city clerk, isn't it?
No, there's an election department, I think.
Election
Yeah,
Department.
there's a separate election
Okay,
department.
so to the mayor and the Election Department, I would send it to both of them. Is everybody comfortable with that? I don't want to do
Yeah.
this without.
And how, I mean, the question though is how to do that, right? I could obviously make calls to individuals to make it. We can write an official letter from the commission.
I would write an official letter. I would write an
Okay.
official letter saying that the Boston Human Rights Commission recommends that more, whatever they're called, ballot
Drop
boxes,
boxes.
whatever they're called, drop boxes, be created in, especially disseminated in underserved communities.
Yes.
Okay.
As soon as possible, because people can vote now.
Yeah, as soon as.
And there is no one, not one box in Boston right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as
So-
possible, yeah. Okay, so we ought to get that out this week,
Yes.
okay?
And sign it as the executive director, who's gonna sign it, I guess?
Well, the chairperson,
Yeah.
Okay,
because it's coming from us as a
Yeah,
commission.
coming from the commission.
okay, got it.
All right. We did good.
So,
did.
I mean, should we record that as a formal
Vote.
vote to authorize the chair to write a letter on behalf of the commission as
Someone
the
want to
chair
make a
just
motion?
described?
So
So
move.
move.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you, Ben, for doing that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All
One
right.
other question I had, just thinking about formalities, is in terms of scheduling. Evandro, I mean, you've heard kind of a vision of what this internet access hearing might look like.
Yes,
And if you hire someone who's like a constituent services, community outreach person, I expect that that person, as part of their ordinary job duties, can find us bodies to tell stories. But it seems to me that in order to really present data in a really good way, that's not somebody you hire, that's like a consultant that you find. And I assume, I don't know anything about city procurements, but I assume that like there's not going to be some standing contract with a person who would be good at this, that there's going to have to be an RFP, and you're going to have to, you know, procure that person. Is that going to require commission approval such that we need to have a meeting in relatively short order to give you that approval, or do you not know that? Or
I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe that obviously expenses and how we use the funding that we have is in your purview. But obviously, you know, the authorization could be something that we do now, and then I can start with the RFP process, which is different depending if it's $10,000 or more. So I need to do further. In fact, we're getting training on that right now,
yeah,
particularly in light of the equity and inclusion issues that the city is pushing. So I would presume we get on that now versus trying to come back to a meeting, which hopefully, obviously, we'll talk about that next, but hopefully it'll be in 2 weeks as well.
okay, great.
But to kind of just answer your question more fully, the person that I thought actually we could hire a research, what did I call it in the paper? I'm sorry. Susan, can
It's
you help me out?
research, it's research analyst.
Right, so we can hire someone full-time to do that. The constituent services were more focused on like intake and helping people that come in through the door with issues and kind of direct them in the right place. The data person will be a data person, driven more towards looking at all these different, as we collect more information, to look at it and gather information. Maybe we do a survey on something, you know, maybe we do a short internal study. That will be in the purview of this person also.
So Susan, why would you not be the person who, when people call, do intake?
So
That's my-
she is, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, let me do it, Susan.
Talk about this after, but I mean,
Okay.
you
She
know.
is doing it now, right? But so
Well, and
she
so
is
far,
doing it now.
anybody, so, you know, but let me say something else is that
Okay, go ahead.
Carolyn Crockett, Chief Crockett has two things going, and I have to talk to her about this. She has a couple of people from MIT, and she's talking to people from the Kennedy School who will do this kind of thing, analysis
Mhm.
on certain kinds of projects. And these may be the kind of things that they would do because they're equity projects. Let me talk to her about it. Because, you know, this way you get high level and quickly, and they'll still have different people who have different skills on different projects. But let me talk to her about it. It might make sense.
Okay.
So let me talk to her about it and see if we can work that out with her.
Okay.
She has a whole slew of people from MIT. And we have a couple of people from the Kennedy School as well, I think.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get to though is that obviously, as Lee alluded to earlier, you know, we have funding to hire people to do it long term, right?
Right.
I understand that we can get help now with some things, but we're trying to, if we're trying to function as a department,
Yeah.
long term, right? If
Right,
we,
right.
the way whatever we want to do, we want to.
We need a sort of analysis person to do.
Right. It sounds like we're going to need an analysis person no matter what because of the positions that we're taking, right?
There's no question. Yeah.
So that's where I'm trying to get us to think about not just these projects, but how we getting building towards the future. Yes, I mean Susan is doing some of the intake now, the little that we're getting, but as we hopefully get a website up, get a office building space, you know, someone comes in and the increase of volume that we get, I'm not sure we wanted to focus on that. So I'm just trying to build a team that can do things, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years going forward with the funding that we have now.
I
Right?
think 2-3 months at a time, past
Right.
November 3rd, if we can all live till then.
Right. And the reality is that when people come in, we hire them, and as happens often within the city departments, as departments evolve, people will switch into different roles depending on where we're going. Right. Obviously, we can't have people with no skills doing something that shouldn't be doing, but depending on where we're going, we can kind of pigeonhole and change direction in terms of how people ultimately fit. But I do think that an intake person, constituent service person focus long-term will be an added benefit, particularly as we start getting information out there that we're here and we're getting calls on a daily basis that can adequately, you know, help people. But I've said enough on this today.
I'm going to have to get off, so I want to try to hear from the constituents.
Yes. So
Yes.
members of the public will now have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. To do so, please raise your hand or type your question in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you can press 9 on your phone and raise your hand, or can send your question to staff via email at susan.hemley@boston.gov.
I don't see any coming up right now.
All right, we'll wait a couple of minutes.
Mhm.
And then I'll be in time. I'm teaching a class tonight, so I'll be in time to teach.
There is a question on the chat.
Okay. How soon do you plan to start hiring process, and will jobs be posted on the web? Is the question.
Yes, the jobs will be posted on the web. The city of Boston as a whole has, there's a careers area where you go through the website to sign on and create create your username, and you can kind of access some different departments, jobs that are available. So this will be posted on that, and hopefully it'll also, any hiring that we'll do will be also posted on our own website that we still, that we're also starting to work on to build as well, which is another area that we've been starting to work on. And the hiring process as soon as possible, hopefully. We're in October now, so it should start next week, at least looking at a couple people.
It's not October. October is tomorrow.
Huh?
October is tomorrow.
October tomorrow, right? So, but so we are be on the lookout for that, Elena, essentially. And just to add a little bit to it, you feel free to send your information, email us, and we have started to create a small email blast, essentially, the people, to just let them know that we're doing doing these meetings. So we certainly probably will put that in those, share with people to just say, listen, we're hiring, send us the candidates this way. So we'll probably share it through that main pool of people that we have already as well.
Okay. I think that's it. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor, say aye.
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 And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
all.
everyone.
See you.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe.
Stay safe, everybody.